guys, this is Jake. Today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about putting. So I've historically been a pretty bad putter, and this year, midsummer, I decided I needed to remedy that, and I decided to rebuild my putting form. Um, and so it went through quite the transition, physically, but also just mentally, how I was thinking about it. I was attempting to, uh, I guess, correct the errors and make them stick. And so I kind of wanted to walk through my thought process and how I went about things. Putting, as you are probably aware, is a very personal thing. Everybody's going to have a different stroke, a different stance, different putters, and they're all equally good. The thing about um, putting is it really doesn't matter how you do it as long as you do it the same way every time. Putting is part of a group of, disc golf, I guess, in general, is part of a group of activities, accuracy and precision activities like marksmanship, archery, darts, bowling, billiards, golf, um, where they're all very dependent on precision and accuracy, two key components. And I'm going to add a third component, which is the ability to engage the autopilot, which we'll talk about too. So I'm going to start by kind of walking through those pieces of the game, and that will will sort of lead into the areas that I needed to change and think about. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about what those pieces or components mean: precision, accuracy, and the ability to engage the autopilot. So first off, precision. Precision is, I think, a better word, or a more friendly word would be consistency. Because the purpose of precision is to get the same result every time. It doesn't mean to get the disc in the basket or the shot on the target in the bullseye every time. That would be accuracy. Accuracy is putting the projectile or whatever it is, you're putting that thing where you wanted to put it. Precision is about being able to do that multiple times in the same way, right? So for marksmanship, when you go to the rifle range and you put a shot down range with a rifle you've never used before, you aren't going to immediately look through the scope, see where the shot landed, and then adjust, because you'd be chasing yourself in circles all day long. What you want to do is you want to shoot 3 to 5 shots in the exact same way, aiming at the exact same spot, and then you look at the target and see, oh, okay, all 5 of my shots were off, to the right in this small little group. I can safely say that I need to move my aiming point further left. If you don't do that and you just look at the first shot, you don't know if it went to the right because it was actually misaligned and you were aiming to the right, or if you yanked the trigger, or if there was a gust of wind or a bad load. You don't know. There's a lot of variables there, and you need to make sure that by shooting a group, that you're a consistent group, that it wasn't just a fluke, that it wasn't just a flyer. Same thing with disc golf. You don't want to take a putt and then be like, oh, that one missed this, missed low, so I gotta give it more, and then you miss way over the top, and you're just constantly going in circles. What you want to do is you want to develop a consistent form. You need precision. You need to be able to know that every time you release the disc, it's going to fly the same way to the same location. It doesn't mean that location is dead center change, but it is the same location. That's the precision piece. If you can get that down, then you move on to accuracy, and that's walking your shots into the center of the target where you want them to land. And the third piece, which I'm going to kind of hold off and talk about that just at the end here, because it'll make a little bit more sense, but that's the engaging the autopilot, and that's essentially being able to do all of that without thinking. So for myself, my biggest issue was that I didn't have precision or the consistency, right? I would throw my putts, and sometimes they'd be high, sometimes they'd be low, sometimes they would spin, sometimes they would wobble, sometimes they'd float. Sometimes they'd come out on a hyzer angle, sometimes they'd come out on anhyzer, sometimes they're flat, sometimes nose up, sometimes nose down. They're all over the place. So what I needed to do was figure out how to get that precision locked in. So this part is where it's very unique to each person, because you can have the ugliest form in the world as long as it's consistent. If you can repeat it, you will have precision, no matter how ugly it is. So as long as it's not so bad that you can't get the disc to the target, if you're only able to putt within 15 feet using your putting form, okay, then you probably need to adjust your form. But if you can hit your target within the circle, it doesn't matter what your putting form looks like. It can be completely different from the next guy. I mean, we've all seen Kevin Jones in a league of his own when it comes to putting. Same with Nico and Paul McBeth. All three have very different putting forms. Ricky. So it doesn't matter what it looks like or what putter you use, whether it's a brick or a very glidey disc, whether it's stable, understable, overstable. That's all personal preference. You need to get comfortable with whatever it is that you're gonna do, and then work on that. And so I think a big problem people have is they look at some pro that they want to emulate, and they say, okay, well, I need to be a spin putter, or I need to be a push putter, or I need to throw this disc, or I need to be a staggered stance, or whatever. And that's really bad, because your body naturally, when you pick up a disc for the first time you go to putt, there's a specific sort of way that you align your body based on your physical makeup and your past experiences with athletics and things like that. You're just naturally going to feel more comfortable in certain positions and with certain grip. And if you try to force yourself to use somebody else's comfort, it's just never going to work. You're never going to be able to make that repeatable, because it's just not what your body wants to do. And you've got so many hours of your body working in a specific way. To try to force it to do something else is significantly harder. It's not to say that you can't do it, but if you're trying to do this in the most efficient way, that is definitely not it. So I guess step one is to just sort of step up. You always hear people talk about, oh, pretend you're playing catch at the basket. And why is that? Because you're using your most comfortable, you're not going to think about it because you've done this a million times kind of throw. And I recommend doing that and kind of thinking about what you're doing after you take that shot. How is your body placed? How are your feet placed? What was your stroke like? Use that as a guide for where you kind of want to build your base from. So let's talk a bit about what I did to fix my precision issues. So the first thing I had to do is figure out why I wasn't precise. My grouping was a very wide grouping, if you think of it like that. A wide range of shots would come out whenever I put. And so the first thing that I needed to do was sort of, like I mentioned, get that comfortable stance and think about what I was doing. And what I noticed was a couple of things. First off, the biggest issue I seemed to have was my release. Just in that it was never consistently flat, which is what I was, whenever I did feel like I had a comfortable putt, the disc comes out flat. Maybe a titch of hyzer, almost non-existent. And I just couldn't repeat that consistently. So I knew my grip had to be somehow at fault. So I spent a lot of time putting putt after putt, thinking about all of the components of my grip each time, feeling how the disc was coming out of my hand, seeing how it would fly, trying to sort of narrow down what it was that was wrong. And what I noticed is when you put, you're moving the disc up, right? It's going like this. And because of physics, the disc is going to want to resist that motion, right? It wants to stay at rest. So you're raising your hand, and the disc is fighting that, which means it's going to try to tilt. This side of the disc is going to naturally resist the rise, which, whatever, it's a fairly light disc. It's not a big deal. It should follow along. But if you don't have a good grip, it makes that a very floppy motion. Then that means that the more energy you put into it, for a longer putt, the more exaggerated that sort of floppiness ends up being, which results in the wobbly putt in my situation. So one thing I did is I looked at my grip, and I didn't have the disc very firmly in my hand. I had my fingers on the disc in a sort of a fan grip sort of thing, had the thumb on the top like this, and then I didn't really have the disc too tight into my hand, which left it fairly loose, which I thought was comfortable, but also was giving me very inconsistent results. So the first thing I did is I basically forced myself to hold the disc all the way in so that the pad of my palm rests on top of the disc now. And that right there prevents this side of the disc from lifting up at all when the torque happens, right? And so that gave me a little bit of extra stability when I was holding it. The next thing I did is I moved my fingers from being completely flat underneath to kind of arching my fingers. So if you play guitar, one of the things you learn is that if you press the frets with your fingers flat, you don't have anywhere near the strength of the power. Whereas if you arch your fingers and kind of push down, you get a lot more strength. Same thing with the disc. If I arched my fingers just a little bit underneath, then it provided just enough force upward to really resist the disc moving downward. And then the last thing was that I moved my thumb from being in the center, which was pushing downward on the flight plate, to more to the edge. And this did two things. One, I'm no longer pushing down, which is, the opposite of the, it's going in the same direction as the force that I'm trying to counteract. But also moving it to the edge resulted in a cleaner release, just because the disc tended to pivot out just in a more natural way for me, having my thumb closer to the edge. If you get too close to the edge, then it slips out. But if you're too far inward, then there's a chance that your thumb is going to sort of push and wobble the disc more. And so for me, those three just small adjustments, putting my palm on top, arching my fingers slightly underneath, and then moving my thumb out towards the edge of the disc, really, really clean that whole thing up. The disc now comes out almost perfectly flat every single time. It comes out with no wobble either. So that was huge. The next thing I realized is, for consistency's sake, I was using a putting motion where I dropped the disc down kind of to the left and between my legs, because I was trying to do more of a push putt. For some reason that seemed like that's got to be the way I needed to putt. Spin putting just scared me because then you have comebackers and then you're putting even more often, so I was just like convinced I needed to do more of a push putt. So I, sort of like old school Nico or Wysocki, just a huge sweeping motion down between the legs to the left and then up and to the right, which is fine if you can get your release point to be the same every time. But what happens is if you release early, the disc is to the left of your line, and if you release late, it's to the right of your line. It's the same thing as when you're driving a disc. If you're rounding, right, the accuracy suffers greatly if you're a little early or a little late. Whereas if you're throwing on line, it reduces a lot of that. Same thing with my putt. So instead of doing that big sweeping sort of low left to high right action, I figured I can pretty much eliminate the left and right misses almost entirely by using a form that I wish I remembered where I heard this. I want to say it was on a YouTube video. putting clinic or something, but somebody talked about that you should pretend like you're painting the pole with a paintbrush. You're making this stroke motion on the actual pole of the basket when you make your stroke. And so I tried to envision doing that. I take the disc and go perfectly straight down and perfectly up, and just never leaving the pole with it. And that way, if I'm going to miss, it's going to be long or short, high, low. It's not going to be left or right. Not unless I have like a weird wrist snap. So that right there took 50% of my misses away. Along with that, the wrist. So when I do that, now I've got a lot less motion, which I'm generating a lot less power from my arm if I'm just trying to keep it on the pole. Because if I try to go too far down, I'm going to run into my leg because I have a staggered stance. And so you can move your leg out of the way like some people do, which seems like it's adding a whole other variable that I'd have to try to account for. Or you need to, basically instead of doing so much of the push, you kind of need to generate a spin and do more of a spin putt to get that extra distance. So I did include, along with the stroke change, I also included a little bit more wrist snap. So now it's leaning a little bit more towards the spin putt side of things than it is the push putt. It's still a hybrid. I'm not flinging them in there 100 miles an hour full spin, but it's more spin than it was. So those two kind of went hand in hand. And the last thing that I changed, which I kind of mentioned earlier, is just having a form that'll get you there. I felt like I was really struggling with my form to hit on the edge of the circle, and especially in circle 2. I would have had to strain really hard with my form to get the disc to even fly that far. And it didn't make sense to me because I used the same form everyone else does, and the pros are obviously getting there from circle 2 with minimal effort. And so what I looked at was my timing. So the way that I generate power when putting is not just with the arm motion, but also with the lower body. So you kind of rock back and forth, or if you straddle putt, you kind of squat and stand up, and that helps generate power for your lower body plus your upper body. Gives you a lot more distance without having to strain yourself. And since I do a staggered putt, I kind of load up on my back foot and rock forward. And at the same time, a stroke goes off with the arm, and if you time them properly, they both sort of peak at the same moment and give you a lot of power. And it turns out I was not doing both those things and having them peak at the same point. I was rocking forward, but I was releasing my putt early. So they weren't both peaking at the same time. So I was losing a lot of power from my lower body. And so that change of paying attention to my timing and making sure that I was releasing the disc as my weight was fully coming forward onto my front foot, that gave me such a massive boost in power that I didn't have to throw as hard. So the upper body had to do a lot less work, and that's the less that you have to strain with the upper body, where you have so many more variables to deal with. The less that needs to strain, the better. If it's just a matter of rocking backwards and forwards, that's a much easier motion. So those are the things that I did to clean up my precision. And when I started doing that, like I said, my putts came out clean, no wobble. They came out on the same angle. The nose was never up or down. It was always sort of a flat release, both this way and up and down. And I was removed to the left or right miss, so I was just almost always hitting my lines now. I could consistently step up to a putt and know where the disc would go, which is something I never quite had the confidence in before. So from there, we move into accuracy. So I use an overstable putter, and that means that there's a higher chance of me missing the shot as we move out because the disc itself is not going to stay on the line that I put it on. I believe that having the overstable putter, um, the pros outweigh the cons there because the disc is less likely to float on me. If I miss it, I know it's going to miss and land close to the basket. If there's a headwind, I don't have to worry about it turning over. I think those are incredibly valuable to me and offset the fact that the disc is going to tail off a lot harder at the end of a putt, and I need to account for that. So that the accuracy part really just required me to set up a basket and start making putts, starting at like 15 feet, and just working my way back and forth, and trying to just sort of memorize, get a feel for, when I'm at 20 feet, how far right do I need to start this to make sure that if it starts to slide back left, it's still going to catch chains. And usually inside the circle, there's not much of an adjustment. It doesn't tend to dive off hard to the left or anything. So it's not a huge adjustment. It's more at circle two. At circle two, when you start talking about those really long putts, then it matters. Then there's a lot more trial and error that needs to be done in order to make those land. But that's really all I need to do for accuracy. My shots were pretty much on target. But you may find that once you find your proper putting form, all of your putts are missing high right, and you need to aim a couple links lower and off to the left side of the pole or something to get those to land. So there may be some adjustment. Usually it's not too much. So that's really all I'm going to say about accuracy. The last piece, engaging the auto putt. So it's one thing to sit in your basement and putt and putt and putt and putt and putt and make them all day long at 20 feet with no wind, with no pressure. You got a stack of putters sitting next to you. It's easy. A lot of people do that. And they train themselves to putt in a basement or in their yard, and they do really well at it, but it doesn't translate to the course. And I think the problem is you're not giving yourself a way to allow your subconscious mind to take over. So before we get into that too much, I want to discuss the conscious and subconscious mind real quick. So if you've ever read, it was the Zen and the Art of Putting or Zen and the Art of Golf or something along those lines. I've read it years and years ago. They talk about the conscious and subconscious mind. And essentially, your mind works in sort of two modes. There's the things that you're thinking about consciously, what you're working on, when you're doing something either for the first time or something that you're really concentrating on, right? Your conscious mind is focused on that. Your conscious mind can focus on one thing at a time. And it's very good at solving problems and dealing with things it's never done before, and learning and giving you valuable feedback and taking in all of the input from your senses. So it's usually what you're doing when you're learning something. It's just why you tend to be pretty awkward while you're learning things, right? If you think of the perfect example is walking, right? When you're first starting to walk, you have no idea what you're doing. Your conscious mind takes over and really just starts trying to figure out how to do it, right? And you're all wobbly and whatever. And then once you kind of have it figured out, your conscious mind hands that task off to your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind is terrible at figuring things out, but is excellent at executing them. And so once you've done something enough times and it gets handed off to that system, like breathing and walking, you don't have to think about it. It just happens, and it's almost flawless. So when your subconscious mind is given control of a task, it's very good at just executing it with near flawless uh, consistency. Um, the the issue is doing something enough times to get the subconscious mind to sort of take it over and to get the conscious mind to let it go. So if you've ever been in the zone, so to speak, while doing something, a lot of times that's what's happened is you've let go and let your subconscious mind take over. And your subconscious mind is going to be significantly more uh, talented at executing things. Um, like when someone tells you to think about your breathing or think about walking, suddenly all of a sudden you can't do it anymore because you've now taken that task away and given it back to your conscious mind. Your conscious mind sucks at doing those things. You know, it was good at figuring it out, but after that, don't let it do anything. So you've got to do do something to engage that part of your mind that does the sort of the triggering of that. And what that ends up being for disc golf is your pre-shot routine. If you develop a pre-shot routine that is, consistent and it's what you use when you practice in the basement or in the yard or whatever, as soon as you start that process, it starts the transition of your mind from, I need to think about this to, oh, I've done this a trillion times here. You do it subconscious mind. And that is really key. That's how you're going to translate this to the course. Because then when you step up in a pressure situation, looking at a basket you've never seen before, a green you've never seen before, things like that, you can still force your mind to treat it as though it's something that you've done a million times. In the same way that I don't have to think about how I walk every time I go to a new park, my mind just knows that, okay, this will be the same kind of thing, right? You can do the same thing with disc golf. You just need to give it the cues. And this comes back to another book that I read, Atomic Habits. Essentially, you're setting off a habit loop. And in order to do that, you need to have a trigger. And the trigger is the pre-shot routine. So you develop some sort of, whether it's the way you set your mini down, the way you adjust the disc in your hand, the way you adjust your body to get ready, something that is a cue to your body that, boom, we're about to do this thing we've done a trillion times. And it should not rely on the surroundings. You should be able to do it in any situation. So that if you're on a new course or in a different, high pressure situation, that part does not change. And if it does not change, then there's a good chance you'll be able to engage your subconscious mind to take over and do that putt that you know how to do, and have done thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So that is the piece that I feel like most people are missing. Many people are able to figure out what they need to do to get a consistent stroke, and to put it sort of on the target, but then they'll step up to a basket on the course and they just can't do it. Everything seems to fly out the window. That everything feels awkward. The putt goes completely crazy, and that's really the key. They spend all that time training their subconscious to putt, and then get out to the course and hand it over to their conscious mind to say, yeah, go ahead, do this thing that you suck at. So yeah, those are the steps that I took to fix my putting this year. I adjusted those bits of my form. I spent a little bit of time considering my accuracy, and then I developed a pre-shot routine, which is really, I guess, to be more specific about my pre-shot routine, it's not overly complex. Essentially, I step up in a specific way with my foot behind the disc, and almost sort of rock my front foot, partially to get good footing, but also just in a specific pattern that I do every single time, to sort of try to trigger that. And then if after that, I may adjust the disc in my hand a little bit, just a slight rotation, and feeling the thumb. Just a little bit of physical cue that I do every time, and that seems to be enough for me to usually to do it. Some people have really long, painful to watch pre-shot routines, and we'll stand there. I mean, we know we've watched pros that sit there, and, wipe their hands 50 times and lick their this whatever, and spin the disc 50 times or flip it or whatever. You know, you've seen that, but those aren't necessary for most people. Most people will find a routine and be able to click over it into subconscious mind mode with a lot less than that. But yeah, it's really personal. Whatever you have to do. I mean, if it takes you the full time allotment, do it. I mean, you're trying to shoot your best. Whatever you have to do, do it. Um, but just know you don't need to come up with some elaborate. You don't need to, say the Pledge of Allegiance and then stand on your head for 5 minutes and whatever. Like, as long as it's something you can repeat every single time in the exact same way, regardless of whether it's windy or raining or snowing or 1,000 fans or you by yourself, that's what matters. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much all I have to say right now on putting. I am still working on it. There's you have to put in a lot of repetition. Once you have the precision and the accuracy kind of figured out, there is still a lot of repetition involved before you're able to hand off that task to your subconscious mind and sort of engage the autopilot. So I'm still working on it, and I'm sure I'll have other things that come out of this. But for now, I think that's a good place to start. And I'd love to hear what you guys think on your own putting style, your own trials and tribulations you've had in changing form, or things that you've come up with over the years that just sort of clicked. So yeah, if you have any comments about putting in general or what I'm doing with putting, go ahead, leave comments below. Otherwise, go ahead and subscribe, and hopefully I'll have some more content out later this week, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.